So let's first see what is WTO. Basically, after World War II, different governments came together and they formed General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, in 1948, which you can say was the precursor of WTO. And it was meant for international trade and to form global rules of trade between the nations, so that there is common understanding between the members countries, and there is proper competition, or you say establishing a fair market throughout the world. So this GATT had different rounds, and an important round called Uruguay round, means it was held in Uruguay, that's why it is called Uruguay round. That was the time when this WTO came into existence. Means WTO, World Trade Organization, was actually for the transformation of GATT, which was formed in 1948. The headquarters of WTO is in Geneva, Switzerland. And it's again the same thing. Main function is to ensure trade flow as smoothly and predictably as possible, so that the welfare of people across the world can be improved. Presently, there are 64 member countries of WTO. This is the structure of WTO, where ministerial conference is the highest body. It is also the decision-making body. It meets every 2 years. And there is a General Council, which looks after trade policy review and dispute settlement. And there are 3 different councils under which one deals with goods, other one with service, and one with intellectual property. And there are different working groups and working parties. So here, important thing to remember as far as different exams are concerned is the ministerial conference is the decision-making body, whereas the General Council looks after trade policy review and dispute settlement. So this is the basic structure. WTO is basically the umbrella agreement that was agreed upon by the members during Uruguay round. And within that, I already told you, it deals with goods, services, and intellectual property. So coming on to our main topic, that is agreement on agriculture. And whatever we look after this, whatever the parts of, or rather agreements under WTO, which are important for us as far as agriculture is concerned, we will be looking only after those things. So interesting thing was that earlier agriculture was not, rather agricultural trade was not a part of GATT. But this WTO, for the first time, it has got agriculture under its purview. Means the WTO deals with agricultural trade also. So mainly the basic objective was to bring order and fair competition and to avoid distorted markets or distorted selling, you can say. And what is the root cause of distortion among the members, or you can say at international level, is massive domestic subsidies given by the industrialized countries, particularly USA and you can say England. These countries give massive subsidies for their farmers to grow certain crops. Rather, they also want their farmers to be in agriculture. That's why also they give domestic subsidies, which leads to excessive production because they have large fields, they have tremendous mechanization, and therefore the cost, they have tremendous production. Moreover, they have very low cost of cultivation if we compare it to Indian conditions. So what happens is their produce, it can be sold at very low price in our domestic market, and our farmers may eventually suffer because of it. At present, we can say that wheat is much cheaper in the international market, but just to support farmers, our government is purchasing wheat from our farmers only. And this excessive production leads to dumping. This is one term to remember. The dumping means dumping their produce into our markets at cheaper cost, so that their produce is sold, which they benefit from, they profit from, whereas our local produce won't be able to compete in a market. So basically, this agreement on agriculture started dealing with agricultural products, including wine, spirits, tobacco products, and cotton, wool, silk, even animals' skins for that matter. Whereas fish and fish products are not included, nor the forestry products are included. So the agreement on agriculture, it deals with three things basically, or these are also called three pillars of agreement on agriculture. One is market access, which deals with tariff and tariff rate quotas. Second pillar is domestic support, which relates to subsidies. And third one is export competition, which leads to export related subsidies or credits. So let's see these three pillars of agreement on agriculture one by one. So the first pillar is market access. It covers tariffication. Tariffication basically means putting every form of restriction into a tariff component. Like there might be some non-tariff barriers, like minimum import prices or quotas given to like different countries, like you can sell only this many quintal or this many tons of wheat in our market. That way, removing those and incorporating those non-tariff barriers into tariff form, it is called tariffication. Moreover, they were asked to reduce tariffs also. Different governments, like for developed countries, it was on an average they were asked to reduce by 36%, whereas the developing countries were asked to reduce these tariffs by 24%. And different access, it also deals with different access opportunities. So I talked about tariff reductions. Here, important thing to note as far as exams are concerned is that least developed countries were exempt from these tariff reductions. Although they had different restrictions in terms of creating a ceiling in future, that way, that they were not supposed to create a ceiling. Price ceiling means that a price of good or service cannot go higher than the regulated ceiling, so that no one can be able to sell particular commodity at very low price. Many countries do that, price ceiling, or rather they used to do that before WTO. Now coming on to second component, that is domestic support. It deals with two aspects, that are, one is trade distorting, another one is non-trade distorting, but or it is rather called minimally trade distorting. Obviously we are talking about fair market, so there should not be any distortion in the trade. So it can be either directly trade distorting, or it will be minimally or minutely distorting the trade. So here basically again two objectives, that is to identify acceptable measures to support the farmers and to deny unacceptable or trade distorting support to the farmers. So this pillar of agreement on agriculture mainly focuses on developed countries rather than any other country, means developing or least developed countries, because as I told earlier, that developing countries give a lot of subsidies and support to their farmers. So the mechanism here is, whatever support is being given by a government to its farmers, it is put under one category, that is aggregate measurement of support. So AMS, it is actually a measure of how much support a government is giving to its farmers. It is a way of quantifying that support. Maybe it is monetary or any other support that government is giving to its farmers. AMS is a means to quantify that support, so that that support can be restricted to certain extent. So important thing here to remember is that aggregate measurement of support is the way of quantifying domestic support. Now each WTO member has its own calculations, and this AMS is calculated. Now the commitments were different, like commitment were made to require a 20% reduction in total AMS for developed countries over 6 years, whereas it was 13% in case of least developing countries. And there was no reduction, again, just like market access for least developed countries. So this is important thing to know: 20% for developed countries, 13% for developing countries, and no such reduction for least developed countries. Now, this domestic support can be categorized into 3 different categories. They are known as boxes: amber box, blue box, and color box. They have green box. They have given these 3 colors. So the amber box are directly linked to production levels, so they have to be reduced. Blue box subsidies have a little bit effect, so they have to be managed. And the green box cause minimum distortion, so they are permitted as such, but they can be reduced to certain levels. So these are these 3 boxes. Here you can better understand that amber box subsidies like fertilizer or giving free electricity, diesel, these things come under mainly direct subsidies, that is amber box. Whereas research, agricultural research, then pest and disease control or trainings or advisory services, these are green box, so nothing to worry about them. And there are blue box, which those subsidies which cannot come under amber and green box will come under blue box. So main focus is on amber box subsidies to reduce. So for developed countries, only 5% of total production, means like if a country has 100 billion US dollar production, then only 5%, means $5 billion they can spend on these kind of subsidies. Whereas for developed countries, it was 10%. Now moving on to export subsidies. Export subsidies are basically to promote export. Certain governments feel that they cannot consume or they cannot process whatever is being produced in their country. So it is best for them is to export that product and earn foreign exchange. And for that, certain countries, they give huge subsidies to their farmers, like maybe free transport, or that way they can promote. If you are promoting, then we'll support you this way. You will per ton you will get this much money from the government. That way also many countries used to support. So here they try to contain the provisions regarding members commitments to reduce export subsidies. And here developed countries, they have to reduce by 30% by value, 36% by value, or 20% of volume. Then developing countries had different restriction, like they could cut their export subsidies by 24% in terms of value and 14% in terms of volume over 10 years. Moreover, they also specified certain products where no such subsidies can be granted in future also. But these were all restrictions, but the WTO or Agreement on Agriculture also has a safeguard mechanism, which is called special safeguard mechanism to allow developing countries. Here it is interesting, particularly it is meant for developing countries to impose additional safety measures in the event of abnormal surge in import or entry of unusually cheap imports. So where a country faces certain situations, like they are experiencing a kind of dumping from some other country, then they can use this special safeguard mechanisms. And they have one term here, special products, and it allows developing countries to assign or make appropriate list of products. Again, here it cannot be on every product, but special products only, based on their food security requirements or livelihood security or rural development. This is actually, you can say, to run away from the cuts imposed in other forms of means pillars of agreement or agriculture. Here they have special safeguard mechanism. If you look at India's commitment, we have to bind our tariff for primary agricultural products at 100%. And domestic support, they include market support price, subsidies on input like fertilizers and electricity. But still our governments, many state governments allow this because that AMS value is very low. Means whatever we are giving, we are much below that AMS value. That's why we are, as of now, we are not facing any trouble at the international level. But if it goes on, we may also face troubles. Then there is a peace clause that says no country can legally be barred from food security programs. This is particularly meant for least developed countries. But again, important thing was it was limited only till 2017, so it doesn't exist anymore. Now coming on to sanitary and phytosanitary agreement. Here important thing is sanitary, means it is related to some kind of hygiene, and phytosanitary means plant related hygiene. So this agreement basically sets out rules for food safety, animal safety, and plant safety or their requirements. So basically it deals with health of individuals or animals. So basically it allows countries to set their own standards. You might have already heard that like England restricting or putting ban on Indian mango, saying that it has this disease, that insect pest attack that way. Moreover, sometimes they put restrictions based on MRL, means residue levels of the insecticides or pesticides that can be found in the agricultural products. So another best example, if you see our most premium exportable product, I would say basmati rice. It has been found that many countries at certain point, they have denied the consignments, Indian consignments, saying that they don't meet their standards because of pesticide residues. But important thing here is this: any country cannot have their any standards. They have to be on scientific basis. They should have a scientific basis, and it can be applied only like necessary things, like to protect human, animal, or plant health. And they should be justifiable, and they should not discriminate countries. Usually WTO encourages its members to use international bodies, international standards, instead of having their own standards for SPS under a SPS agreement. So this agreement addresses the problem of how to ensure that countries' consumers are being supplied with food that is safe. This is important thing. Safety is the main concern here. And it also ensures that health and safety regulations are not being used as an excuse for protecting domestic producers. Like I cannot, or we as a country cannot put any restriction saying that this doesn't meet our safety parameters. It should be justifiable. So there are some basic pillars or basic principles, I would say, of this agreement. One is harmonization, that allows member nations to form international standards, guidelines, and recommendations. There are these three international standard setting bodies. One is International Plant Protection Convention. It particularly deals with plant health. Then World Organization for Animal Health. As mentioned, it deals with animal health. And Codex Alimentarius Commission, or Codex, simply it deals with food safety. As such, this codex is much more of importance, but I'm not going to deal with that here. You simply have to remember that it's a commission that deals with food safety standards under SPS agreement. Then another principle is equivalence, that the exporting country has to validate the appropriate measures taken for protection by the importing country. And there should be appropriate level of protection, like each member for their respective countries, they should not conflict with trade. Then there is a risk assessment. It evaluates the potential negative impact on human or animal or plant health. Then there is a regional condition. It happens sometimes that some diseases are endemic for certain area, so it deals with that. Then there has to be a transparency. You cannot suddenly come out with some measures or certain standards. You have to be transparent about it. You have to give all your maybe in terms of residue level or pests, that only this much quantity we can be acceptable, beyond which we will not import. Now that was SPS agreement. Now moving on to trade related aspect of intellectual property rights, TRIPS. Here it deals with intellectual property rights, not with product, not with service, but with intellectual property. So again, WTO was came on this, means before WTO, there was no trading system for this IPR issues. And under TRIPS, there are different IPRs, like copyright and trade related rights. For example, a music company comes with video or a cassette of songs. So whenever that song is being sold, some part of it goes to the people with whom the copyright is, means those who are entitled to this copyright, like singer or musician or composer. Then trademarks. Every company has its own, like Apple, you know that Apple has a symbol of apple with small cut at the top. So no one else can use this trademark and sell their products. It mainly prevents other products to copy these products which are being trademarked. Then comes geographical indication. This is particularly related to agriculture. I'll deal with it a little later. Then we have industrial designs, patents. Another thing, patents, you might have heard. I'm from Maharashtra, so I will just quote one example, that in Maharashtra, if you go, we don't have term photocopy. We don't say that I need photocopy of this page. We simply say get it xeroxed, or I want 5 xeroxes of this copy. It happened because the patent for photocopier machine went to this Xerox. Actually, it's a company, so they had this patent for copyright, patent for photocopier machine. So it became popular, and now we call Xerox itself. or maybe you might know many such examples. Then there are layout designs for integrated circuits and other trade secrets. So all of these are not as such important as far as agriculture is concerned. So we'll be dealing with very few. So TRIPS basically deals with issues like how the trading should be, or how this IPR should be applied, then how to protect different IPRs, and to enforce means countries were made to design laws as per this IPR guidelines given by WTO. And moreover, this TRIPS helps to to settle dispute between nations or between companies. So moving on to international obligations. Under TRIPS related to protection of plant varieties. Here this aspect is particularly related to agriculture. So I'm dealing with it. That in many countries, they have patents for varieties also. But you may not have heard any of the farmer or breeder claiming for patent for a plant variety in India, because under this agreement there are different types of provisions which can be used for protecting plant varieties. First one is by patent. Another one is by effective sui generis system. Sui generis is one developed to suit each country's need and priorities. So important thing for us to remember here is that India has a sui generis system, means we have developed our own system based on our needs and priorities. And the third form is can be a combination of patents and sui generis system. But for us, it is sui generis system. Here, countries are free to choose their effective sui generis regime for protection of plant variety rights. And there is an UPO, means it's an organization, International Union for the Protection of New Plant Varieties of Plant, which works at international levels. But India is not part of it, or rather, since we have a sui generis system, we don't follow this UPO for protection of plant varieties. So let's see what is this plant variety protection, how it works in India. Throughout the world, they had this convention on biodiversity, then biosafety protocol, then came the WTO and then UPO, but we didn't follow that. We developed our own, and an act came into place, which is known as Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act 2001. Through this, Indian government has tried to incorporate this protection aspect as well as the rights of farmers or communities into one act, one mechanism. That's why we call it a sui generis system of our own. And it is an outcome of intensive and extensive national consultations. So let's see, these are different objectives of this act, popularly known as PPV-FRA 2001. So first thing is developing an effective system for protection of plant varieties as well as rights of farmers. Then to recognize farmers, means under this, we also recognize farmers for their, when they conserve certain varieties or plant genetic resources. Then we also have protection of plant breeders' rights, so that they are encouraged for more research and development, and to facilitate growth of seed industry. There should not be any kind of distortion just because of some law or some rights given to breeders or farmers. So under PPV-FRA, as of now, more than 102 crop species are notified for different crops like cereals, legumes, fibers. And this is the term of duration for protection. Like for trees and vines, you can get protection or the rights for 18 years, whereas for other crops, it is just 15 years. So they have these different terminologies. I don't think there is a need to go into each and everything, like what is new variety, extant variety, or essentially derived variety. You can refer to better articles which can explain what are these things if needed. Otherwise, for exam point of view, I think this much is more than important for you. So, but important thing for registering a variety under this PPVFRA, it has to have 4 characteristics. One is novelty, that it should be new. New in the sense, it should not be sold or otherwise exploited from any other source. Then it should be distinct. Distinctiveness should be there, that it should be from at least one character. A variety should have a one character which can differ it or distinguish it from any other variety. Then there is uniformity, that a variety should, when cultivated over a land or over a period of time, it should exhibit that particular character. Then stability. Those characters should not get modified when there is repetitive production. So basically, these are the four criteria. You might have heard about DUS centers. DUS stands for distinctness, uniformity, and stability. So whenever you have to register a new variety, a breeder or a farmer gives this variety to the body and the PPUFRA, and they go to check if it is the variety given by the breeder or a farmer is distinct or not. It performs uniformly and it is stable in its characteristics. Now there are different provisions under PPUFRA. One is about breeders' right, because it is about protecting a plant variety. So breeder comes into play. So here it allows means breeder to have, or his agent or his successor to have exclusive right on production, selling, marketing, distributing, importing, or exporting. A breeder may also authorize some person for all this. It means it's his right to claim some reward for it or not. He can simply authorize a person. Here, moreover, variety can be used for some abusive acts. So here, this breeder enjoys a protection also with this act to not get involved in that abusive act. Now there are researcher rights. Means apart from breeder, who has protection over his variety, other researchers also have some rights over that particular variety or that particular product, you can say, for conducting their experiment and research. They can use the registered variety as an initial source of variety for their researches and or for creating other varieties. Means the breeder cannot restrict other researchers from using his variety. Only thing is they need to take authorization of breeder if the same variety is repeatedly being used for commercial production. That is the only condition. Otherwise, researchers can always use registered varieties for their experiments or as initial source for creating other varieties. Then another important part as PPV FRA. So this FR means farmers' rights. It provides access to seeds. Means farmers can save their seed. No one can complain about it. They can use it for repeated sowing. They can exchange it with the other farmers or sell it to other farmers as a variety. Only thing is they cannot brand it. Like they have some variety, let's say Pusa Basmati 1121. They cannot brand it and sell it. They can simply sell to other farmers as a seed, but they cannot brand it and sell it. So this is about farmers' rights. Moreover, farmers or other communities who have specially contributed in conservation of these varieties, or you can say germplasm, have a right for recognition and reward. And this PPV FRA authority, every year they give this recognitions and rewards to the farmers and communities through gene fund. They have a provision of gene fund also for this. Then farmers' right to compensation. Here it is important. You might have heard or noticed that many a times a company gives seeds to the farmers and they don't perform, or they fail to germinate. In such cases, farmers are entitled for compensation. PPUFRA actually empowers farmers in this way that they can claim for compensation in case of failure of that particular variety. Farmers have right for benefit sharing also. Like if a breeder uses some farmers seed or germplasm for creating or developing a variety, then that benefit, whatever the breeder is getting, he has to share those with the farmers from which he got that variety. So this is another important thing, benefit sharing for farmers. So under PPVFRA, these are the things, like they have community rights, farmers right, breeders right, and there are different provisions made for this. For example, for registering, they have dust centers to test whether a particular variety is working or not. Then they have this plant variety journal, where once after registering, the name of the variety is published in this journal so that everyone comes to know. And there are different penalties, means there are already provisions of penalties and different infringements if they are noticed. So this was about PPUFRA. Now moving on to geographical indication. As I have already mentioned, under IPR, this is one which particularly relates to agriculture. So what is geographical indication? It's basically a sign used for good that has a specific geographical origin, or possesses a qualities or reputation that are due to that origin. Here that origin, the geographical area is of concern. I have mentioned here two pictures. One is of Darjeeling tea. This actually it's just a picture, or you can say sign of that Darjeeling tea, but it can be used only on the products that are coming from that particular area, along Darjeeling and around that. Moreover, to your right, you can see a champagne bottle. Champagne, we think it's just a drink, but it's actually, it comes from the area called Champagne in France, and it has got GI. So products coming only from that area can be termed as champagnes, not anywhere else. So whatever, if you see Indian made champagne, it's not actually the champagne. So as I have already mentioned, GI consists of the name of the place of origin. Like the champagne, I have already told you, Darjeeling. You might know about many GIs like this from your area. You might also heard about many issues related to this. For an example, Basmati. It was sold with so many other names across the world, like Texmati and so many names. It was being sold because it was not protected by India. Just few years back, I think around 2016, India has registered this Basmati as geographical indication, and now they're registering it throughout the world, so that no one else can sell this Basmati. Only some areas they have in Pakistan and in this Himalayan foothills in India, only they can sell this Basmati rice as Basmati throughout the world. You may probably know that in between, what used to happen was, many companies, they started growing these Basmati varieties in MP. and they started selling it as basmati, but it is not counted as such because the Himalayan foothills has particular kind of climate, particular kind of soil, which leads to basmati giving a particular smell. So it cannot come from anywhere else. That's why basmati is given geographical indication for areas like Jammu Kashmir, Punjab, Himachal, Uttarakhand, and Haryana. So here important things to notice as that the geography or that particular place is of important because it is due to maybe due to a local natural environment or due to some human factors, like at certain points or certain areas people develop certain kind of skills. I will mention one thing here, that in Punjab fulkari is a part of actually it's kind of embroidery that is done, but it is only done in Punjab and Rajasthan because people here or certain people here have certain skills to make fulkari. So if it is being developed somewhere else, they lack that skill, so that product will get devalued. So because of which these geographical indications are given, and it involves either natural means place of origin or natural environment has its effect on it, or some human factors are involved like skills. So basically this geographical indication represents a collective asset linked to a local heritage and its reputation. Then one of the point in your syllabus is about technical barriers to trade. I have already mentioned before about when we were dealing with SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, that the countries can have their own standards. But we have also observed that many countries were deliberately putting their standards so that they can restrict imports of certain products in their country. So this agreement on TBT, that is technical barriers to trade, it ensures technical regulations, standards, listing, certification procedures that do not create unnecessary obstacles to trade. Means there should be regulations and standards, but they should not be unnecessary. This is important. So it prevents restriction on trade for technical needs, but it also supports technical assistance required for legitimate objectives, such as consumer protection, national security, and environmental protection. When these standards are not met, barriers are allowed. But if these are not at all concerned and the countries are putting regulations and standards unnecessary, the agreement comes into play and it prevents such kind of market distortion. So this agreement is applicable on consumer products, including both industrial and agricultural products. That's why we have particularly included this in syllabus, technical barriers to trade. So mainly here, this agreement prevents any member from discriminating imports on the basis of technical regulations and standards. And it encourages WTO members to support international standards, whereas these standards are inappropriate. So what WTO expects is all the countries to have uniform standards across the world as far as possible. Now, these were different issues we were looking at from agriculture perspective in WTO, like TRIPS, SPS or TBT or IPR issues. Now, what are their implications for us? Actually, these issues are particularly considered in the best interest of developing countries like India. As I have already mentioned, like in between it happened, like many countries used to put residue level, or this England banned Indian mangoes because they are very popular, particularly Alfonso is very popular in England. But to promote their farmers, they started restricting Indian imports, saying that they have this insect, that attack. So WTO rather wants to prevent these things, and it is in best interest of developing countries. So there are different market distortions which emerge from inequity in domestic subsidies. Again, these developed nations, what they do is they give the huge subsidies to their farmers, and WTO tries to prevent those or tries to reduce that kind of domestic subsidy, so that everyone has a fair market. Whoever has cheaper produce will, or cheaper procedures, will get benefit. Whoever has better standards will get benefit. But there are also certain special safeguards. By that way, we can, like many a times we have seen, like governments putting ban on imports or ban on exports of certain things in certain situations, like when it is related to food or livelihood security of nation. Under these safeguards, there is a way out that we can bypass these restrictions put by the WTO. But these kind of rights are given to certain countries only, and that too for certain products and for certain period of time. So basically, this WTO hopes for better liberalization through removal of tariff and other type of barriers. But again, since nothing can make a market perfectly competitive, there will always be issues, and that is the time where this dispute settlement body of WTO helps, particularly the developing countries. There are other issues where it's called dirty tariffication, like particularly the developed countries, they reduce the tariffs, means which are on the low side, more than the high tariffs. So what happens is their domestic produce gets benefit from this, whereas the outsider products or whatever the country is importing, those products face this. But again, WTO is underway or in the process of trying to reduce this type of restrictions, or you can say dirty tariffication put by different developed nations. Moreover, in countries like this where they particularly promote export, particularly USA, they give huge export subsidy concessions to their farmers. But again, this WTO, and it has most binding on this WTO commitments, and it tries to establish a fair market. Now, moving on to how can we better manage this as far as India is concerned, means considering the implications of agreement on agriculture. We have to frame our domestic policies in a way that we can, within the purview of WTO agreements, we will be able to help our farmers. We have different provisions, like we give minimum support price to the farmers for certain commodities, or we have a public distribution system to ensure food security. These usually don't come under the purview of this, because these are mostly green box subsidies or policies, you can say. So we can manage this properly. We don't have to be over enthusiastic about these things. Moreover, I have already mentioned that our AMS aggregate measure of support is much below the restricted level or much below the benchmark. So we don't have to worry about this as of now. Moreover, this agricultural research and extension services are a part of green box subsidies, so they don't have to be reduced or get affected. Moreover, in times of natural disasters or any unusual events, we can still manage our subsidies, you can say, or the support we give to our farmers without any hindrances. What we need is a better integrated business of handling this transportation and storage of food grains, where our governments can invest more, so that we better manage our produce and our farmers don't have to face many troubles in marketing their produce. So the ultimately the cost of production or cost of marketing or cost of transactions go down, so that our products can be much more competitive in the international market. So again, if you want to benefit from all this, we expect our governments to invest more in things like basic infrastructure for agriculture, like irrigation, transport, and then agriculture extension services and agriculture research. Then only we'll be able to help our farmers properly without facing any trouble from WTO or its agreement on agriculture. So this was all about the agreement on agriculture. I have kept it as minimum as possible, because again, this is, if you see a wide area, there are so many facts, many of it you already know, but you have to limit yourself to somewhere, like considering if you are planning for some exam which has only multiple choice questions, then their facts are important, like what comes in green box or what doesn't comes in amber box, that way. Or which institution like codex is responsible for what, or where it is headquartered at. These types of things you need to know. Otherwise, if you look at the long term long answer questions for, let's say, 10 marks or 5 markers, in that case you have to have a broader idea of WTO, what are the different agreements, how WTO, one thing is common, that it is trying to establish a fair competitive market. So how WTO and its agreement try to promote or try to ensure that a fair and competitive market is being established across the globe. So that you have to have an idea, and accordingly you can write answers based on the information what I have covered. PPV FRA is one important thing. You have to know about its different components, what they mean, like what breeders' right mean, but how do they don't affect farmers' rights or any other rights, what is benefit sharing, how it works. These are the simple things you have to know. So this was all from me about implications of agreement on agriculture under WTO, its different aspects like TRIPS, SPS, TBT, etc. So thank you so much to the organizers.